Thank you for being here with us today. I would like to thank people who's always participating in our conferences and webinars. And I would like to also welcome the new incomers to our webinar today. I sincerely want to thank our platinum sponsor for GCC Regulatory Affairs Pharma Summit 2023, Honeywell, and its team to their collaboration and partnership that really gets a lot of values and understanding of a lot of matters that we'll speak about today. And thank you for joining us on this webinar as well. The United Arab Emirates Ministry of Health and Prevention Tatmin regulation is just one of the newest serialization and traceability compliance requirement for the pharmaceutical product movements within the country's supply chain. The pharma industry will continue to see this kinds of regulation to put in a place to protect the consumer at the end. More and more governments are enhancing this regulation and legislation requirements for serialization and traceability of all the pharmaceutical products to maintain supply chain integrity and to ensure patient safety at the end. Currently, over 25 countries have some types of pharma supply chain serialization or track and trace government regulation policies and compliance in the place. Each country is developing its own serialization and regulatory compliance requirements. Most of them are aligned with the GS1 standard, with a few exceptions. So it's critical for any pharmaceutical organization to implement serialization and traceability solutions that are scalable and multitude and vary requirements to minimize the efforts and investments. The key highlights of today's webinar will be discussing the potential challenges that will face in implementing the compliance solution, learning more about serialization regulations such as Tatmin UAE and RSD in Saudi Arabia, and how to compliance effective and downstream pharmaceutical supply chain stakeholders. Understanding how to overcome these challenges and experts' perspective. I hope you will enjoy it. We will have a Q&A. Please, if you have any question, add it on the question. If you want to introduce yourself, you are most welcome to introduce yourself in the chat box to the others who are in. Welcome you all again. Let me start by introducing our speakers and we will go from there. We have today Mr. Santosh Balbhadra Travedi, Senior Product Manager, Track and Trace at Honeywell. Mr. Santosh has a Bachelor of Engineering Chemical degree in the G.H. Pallet College of Engineering and Technology. Mr. Santosh is also from Gujarat, India, where he studied from 1819 to 2022. He has almost 20 years of overall experience, and he has worked in a pharma life science industry vertically for 12 years. In various roles of development and business analysis, product owner, serialization, track and trace expert. His current role since 2022 Feb is with Honeywell as a Senior Product Manager, track and trace, facilitating government customer implementation, serialization, track and trace solution to adhere and implement the legal regulation requirements, to implement it and add value to the solution, to improve the supply chain visibility and integrity. Our second speaker is Mr. Varun Sain, Product Management Lead, Track and Trace SaaS platform at Honeywell as well. Mr. Varun offers management lead for Track and Trace in Honeywell. Prior to Honeywell, he has worked in a GE and their digital solutions business and Nokia Siemens Networkings as well. For the communication technology business, in addition, he is an alumni of prestigious commercial leadership program of the GE. As of his education, he has a Bachelor of Electronics and NIT Surat, India, MBA in a marketing and IMT Ghaziabad as well, India. He has 11 years of diverse experience in the industry of softwares, logistic, connection, industry, and transportation domain. welcome on board our prospective speakers. Please, I'll hand it over to Mr. Santush.
Thanks, Dr. Mona. I appreciate the welcoming. Let me quickly share my screen and we can get started. Just let me know once you guys are able to see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. So, as Dr. Mona highlighted, today we'll talk about the challenges in terms of readiness for any new pharmaceutical serialization regulation which comes up, right? As rightly highlighted, totally there are around 25 countries with some kind of serialization and track and trace regulation active for that particular country regulation. And recently we have seen UAE also go live with the serialization and track and trace regulation, which is known as TATMI, right? So now taking forward, if we see this particular slide here, basically it encompasses of what overall the serialization and track and trace regulation is about, right? So with regards to the regulations which are coming up in the GCC countries, be it say Bahrain, be it say UAE or Saudi, RSD, all the serialization and track and trace regulation in GCC countries are with regards to not only just the serialization piece, but the overall traceability across the pharmaceutical supply chain stakeholders, right? So if we see, the regulatory reporting is required right from the manufacturers or the importers till the end dispensers, right? So and in the future there could be potential that the consumers can also authenticate the product themselves if the government repositories expose an alternative or a solution or a possibility for the consumers to validate the product, right? So that is the eventual goal. The reason why serialization and track and trace regulations are coming up is to ensure patient safety, right? That is the single agenda for all such serialization and track and trace regulations. And more the traceability, we can ensure that the authentic product is supplied to the end consumer or the patient, right? So this so moving forward, let's kind of encapsulate what are the different challenges which comes up, right? So we'll talk with regards to serialization. As Dr. Mona briefly highlighted, that most of the countries align to GS1 standards, right? So the first complexity comes is whether you are able to understand what GS1 standards are relevant to. What does it comply? What are the regulatory requirements from GS1 standards perspective, right? So typical challenges start right from the encoding or the understanding of the 2D barcode metrics, which is basically the serialized JITIN or the linear SSC codes, right? Do the organizations have a complete visibility in terms of what exactly has to be printed on the secondary pack, or what exactly has to be printed on the bundle level or the SSC level or the pallet level, right? So that is the basic fundamental. Now, typically in the pharmaceutical world, we have seen the standard with GS1 has adopted for most of the countries is to kind of print the JITIN serial number, expiry date, and the batch number as a part of the 2D data matrix on the secondary packs, so that the secondary packs can be uniquely identified and authenticated, right? So that's the ultimate goal. But additionally, we have seen a lot of countries like Brazil or Russia, they also want to encode some country specific local attributes as well. So for example, for Russia, they want to have a unique crypto code that they want to encode in addition to the prerequisite set up by GS1, right? So it is very critical to understand what are the encoding requirements for that specific country, and the solutions that we deploy with regards to serialization should adhere to the requirements globally of all the country, right? So that is the key. Now the second part of the GS1 standards is in terms of how do you uniquely identify your organization in GS1, right? So That is the setup of the master data with regards to the global company prefix, the global location number, right? So global location number is uniquely identifying each of your facilities or plants or site via the GLN, which is the global location number, which is provided by the GS1 once you register that entity, right? Similarly, we also need to define global trade item number, which is GTIN, for each product uniquely, right? So from that perspective, also global company prefix is basically a key ingredient in terms of what it needs to be registered with GS1. Uh, we have seen a lot of examples where a lot of organizations try to have multiple GCPs requested from GS1 unique to each site. That is really not required, right? Because as the abbreviation stand for, GCP stands for Global Company Prefix. So overall, at an organization level, you should typically only have one standalone unique GCP, and then under that GCP you can have different GLNs specific to each of your facilities or sites or plants, right? And so on and so forth. So this is really the key to understand the GS1 standards. How does the concept of master data work, right, in terms of GCP, GLN, and then how do you set up the master data in branching? So in GCC countries, GS1 has come up with the branching system where all the master data with regards to the customers, the suppliers, the products has to be set up. And all these identifiers like GCP, GLNs, GTINs are the key requirements to set up this master data, right? So this is all with regards to the GS1 standards, right? Going forward, what we see is in terms of the encoding requirements, what are the typical challenges that are faced, right? So does the organization who is going to implement the serialization solution for any regulatory requirement have the understanding of the overall encoding requirements, right? So as we said, the serialization and encoding requirements, although there is a standard defined in terms of 2D data matrix and the SSCC barcodes in terms of what exactly has to be printed as a minimum prerequisite, there would be specific country specific requirements which may vary from each country to country, right? So from that perspective, it is very critical that whenever you are basically implementing the solution on your packaging lines or your aggregation lines or your distribution lines or even in your packaging operations, you have to ensure that you follow standardized practices, right? So that you can globally not only kind of adhere to a country specific requirement, but that same solution should be capable or scalable enough to basically work for all the different regulations in different countries as well, right? And last but not the least, adherence to the GS1 2D data matrix barcodes and the linear barcode for SSCC. That is the mandatory requirement for any encoding standard that comes up with any of the serialization and track and trace regulation, right? Going next, now this other part is in terms of the reporting to the regulatory authorities. Do we know what does the EPCI standards mean, right? So all the regulatory reporting with regards to the serialization and track and trace regulations, GS1 has defined the EPCI standards, which stands for the Electronic Product Code Information Services, which is again a unique way in terms of how the data has to be exchanged with the regulatory repository systems, right? So here the key challenges are that we have to always adhere to the latest EPCI standards. We always need to understand the standard and local extensions in these EPCI events. So for example, for Tatmin, we have specific local extensions with regards to the shipping permit or with regards to the manufacturing or the import permit, right? Which is not a part of the standard EPCIs, but it's a local extension specific to Tatmin, right? Similarly, other countries might have other requirements with regards to the local extensions, right? So it is really necessary to understand what is the overall format of the EPCIs information that we need to basically submit to the regulatory repository body, along with all the local and the standard extensions as well, right? And then last but not the least, each country comes up with their unique serialization and traceability requirements, right? So the reporting requirement may vary from country to country. So for example, Tatmin requires to submit, say, 16 different reporting events for different packaging operations, right? From commissioning to aggregation, disaggregation, shipping, receiving, till dispensing, and exception events like stolen, lost, destroyed, damage, and so on and so forth. Other country like Bahrain, they have probably a subset of these events, or there might be another country which might be coming up with more events than what is required in Tatmin. So here we have just shown a sample example of Tatmin in this block where we see all the events which are required for Tatmin, right? So it is very critical to understand what are the reporting requirements specific to the EPCI's standards for each and every country, right? So that is also unique. Now, going forward, right, in terms of basically the challenges with regards to the overall perspective in terms of the supply chain operations and the regulatory reporting, how exactly it happens, right? So obviously, whenever serialization and track and trace regulations go live, it will ultimately impact your supply chain operations, right? It might impact the productivity and the efficiency in terms of how your supply chain operations are going to perform, right? So because now you would additionally have to adhere to all the serialization and traceability requirements. So how do you do it effectively? So there are a lot of challenges and optimizations which can be done, right? So let's understand. So first challenge is to ensure the hardwares that are used on the packaging lines or packaging operations or aggregation line or the distribution lines are optimized, right? You are able to scan and print. There might be a requirement of bulk scanning. So for bulk scanning, if you used a single handle scanner, then it will not suffice. So for bulk scanner, you need a larger scale scanner which can uh, capture the information at one go for multiple products, right? So on and so forth. Then and the other part is how do you design your business operations or your business solutions around the supply chain business processes? That is the other key factor in terms of ensuring that your supply chain operations run as smooth as possible with adherence to the serialization and track and trace requirements, right? And we need to define the correct triggers for the regulatory reporting to the repository system, because if you do not have correct triggers defined as to when the reporting should be done for each and every event for the regulatory repository system, then ultimately it will impact your efficiency and productivity of your supply chain processes, where there might be a lot of rework required, or that might be a lot of clarification required or validation required, right? So the thumb rule for that is ensuring that regulatory events are reported successfully in alignment to your physical operations. So as and when you perform the physical operations, you have to immediately report that specific event to the regulatory body, right? So that is the key to ensure to optimize this reporting events to the regulatory repository body, right? Now, having said that, from the system perspective, there are two critical aspects: that all the master data, like basically your JITN information, your product information, your customer information, the GLN information, as well as the transactional data, as in the EPCI's events, whether it's commission event or shipping event or receiving event, those have to be reported to any regulatory body with utmost data quality, right? Because right now, there are no penalties or fines, but if you take an examples of EU FMD regulation in the EU region, they have imposed now penalties and fines, and in extreme cases also market exclusion for that particular organization or entity for that product, wherein incorrect information is repeatedly reported to the regulatory body. Because the end goal with regards to serialization and track and trace, as I mentioned previously, is to ensure patient safety. So if the data is getting reported incorrectly to the regulatory systems, then there is data integrity issues in terms of what physically the product is being sold to the market versus what logically you have it within your regulatory systems, right? So this is really the key, right? So herein, basically, we have shown a snapshot of how exactly overall optimization of the processes should happen, wherein you have your manufacturing plants or factory warehouses which integrate to your centralized serialization and track and trace system. Also, all your scanners, handle devices, and the appliances should be capturing and integrating this information back and forth with basically your serialization systems, and then you basically from there on go on in terms of reporting to the regulatory repository systems, right? Going to next now, how do you resolve typically all these challenges, right? So when you design your serialization system, you need to ensure that your serialization system is adhering to the GS1 and EPCI's guidelines. So right, you have the master data resolution in terms of GCP, GLNs, JTINs, and the EPCI standards in terms of the local and standard extensions as well. And then you have integration to the systems like brand sync or the regulatory system, right, which is the key. Ultimately you have to report all the data and events to the regulatory system. Now, so your serialization system should be the centralized piece of the puzzle in terms of integrating to any regulatory authority or the regulatory system. Next in, if you see, you should have standalone serialization engine, which should have capabilities of generating the serial numbers uniquely for each of the products, and basically also generating the SSCC labels, right, in terms of the linear barcodes on the pallet or the tertiary packaging levels, right? Along with that, your manufacturing plants and warehouses should be able to integrate to your centralized serialization system and be able to sync the data real time or as per the business operations with the serialization systems. Also, it should be capable to have the label printing appliances, you have the right scanners and the right printers available, as well as the regulatory repository, regulatory event reporting solution as well, right? So this in nutshell overall captures how effectively you can resolve all the serialization challenges, right? Just to give an overview. Now, again, what are the different operational challenges which come up when you are implementing the serialization solution, right? So one of the key understanding that is required is the data strategy, right? So from data strategy, do you have an overall vision? How will you uh, ensure that your system can basically capture the data surge in terms of the volumes of the serialization data being generated on the yearly basis, right? So for example, a typical analytic study shows that the serialization and regulatory reporting data is estimated to double every couple of years. So are your systems capable enough to handle this much data volume? Are your systems capable enough to ensure that the performance of your system is not impacted with this much surge of the data, right? Again, integration with your ERP or WMS data or systems will ensure that the data volumes are multiple bounds, right? So some of the data is in structured format like the EPCS format, some of the data is in unstructured format, which is the business language. How do you optimize your basically structured data versus unstructured data? That is also a key perspective in terms of how you should be designing your overall data strategy and the robustness of the serialization system, right? Again, overall, when you talk about the robust data strategy, it should be able to uh, kind of absorb the volumes of the data that is generated based on the serialization and track and trace solution requirements. But additionally, it should also be able to effectively provide you a visibility of the overall supply chain processes, analytics solutions, operational telemetries, and the standard reporting solutions, right? And then obviously, in terms of the complexity, how the events are stored and the reported as a part of operations to the regulatory repository system, that is also key, right? Continuing with basically some of the examples that we see, as we see, right, in the GCC countries, the overall track and trace regulation, the traceability is required from the manufacturer till the end customer levels or the dispenser level, right? So some of the typical examples where operational challenges can happen is when manufacturer physically ships the product without reporting the commissioning or the shipping event to the regulatory authority. What will it lead to? The customer to which they have physically shipped the product, they will not be able to successfully receive the product because the prerequisite of the commissioning data or the shipping data is not currently available with the regulatory repository system, because of which the receiving process at the customer end would fail. Similarly, the distributors, wholesalers, and retailers, if they do not report the shipping event prior to shipping the physical shipment to their customers, they will also face the similar challenges. Then the other part is in terms of your packaging operations. How do you report the hierarchy information? The hierarchy information that is reported to the regulatory system versus what is physically packaged should match as one is to one. There cannot be any mismatches. Else, what will happen is in the downstream operations where the hierarchy is unpacked and standalone products are kind of dispensed, there would be issues in terms of validation with the repository system. Also, one of the common errors that can happen is incorrect labeling. So that in terms of your physical hierarchy, what you are generating, you might have put incorrect labels at the tertiary level or the pallet level. So which kind of leads to issues in the supply chain operations for the customers, right? Wherein when they try to scan the product, it will give an invalid error because the hierarchy which is submitted to the regulatory repository system does not match with what is basically printed physically on the products, right? So and then obviously there are like the exception events, so events like stolen, lost, how exactly those are to be reported, right? There are operational challenges because typically what happens is for example, a manufacturer supplies say 100 pieces of drug to a customer. Now when customer receives the product, they only receive 99 pieces of it instead of 100. Then who is responsible to identify which one piece is not delivered correctly, right? So whose ownership it is? So it's a collaborative effort that is required. The customer has to reach out to its supplier to understand what was the hierarchy which the supplier had sent to them and what is exactly missing, and then the missing piece has to be identified and reported correctly to the regulatory system. So these are the ways in terms of how you have to understand how the physical operations are being challenged as a part of effective regulations of serialization and track and trace, right? Now, continuing ahead, and like what are additional operation challenges, right? When you define your serialization systems, right? Typically, you want to design a single system which can satisfy the regulatory requirements of the countries across the globe, right? You don't want to design a unique system for each country. It does not make sense from financial perspective, it does not make sense from operational perspective, and it does not make sense from the overall ecosystem perspective in terms of the maintenance of the systems, right? From any organization perspective. So it is therein you have to ensure that the serialization system that you are implementing is compliant to the entire ecosystem across the global requirements of serialization and track and trace requirements, right? Because it involves a lot of different integration with the legacy systems, the ERP or the WMS systems, different serialization systems which your customers or suppliers are using, and also the cloud systems, right? So overall, if you see from the serialization perspective, the serialization and the traceability systems, they should be robust, they should be adaptable, they should be scalable, and they should be performance intensive. These are the minimum requirements with which you need to design and implement your serialization systems and solutions. Because if that is not done, then you will ultimately be falling into a trap of having multiple ecosystems defined within your internal organization to comply to each of the country requirements, right? Which obviously does not make sense, right? Going ahead, like let's talk about some of the sample examples. We have taken the example of Tatmeen over here in terms of the overall supply chain stakeholders. What are the different events getting reported, right? So right from commissioning to packing, unpacking, shipping, receiving, product status events like block, unblock, exception events like damaged, stolen, exported, so on and so forth, right? these are all the different events which are required to be reported. Now it is very critical, as I mentioned earlier as well, to understand what are the regulatory reporting requirements of each of the countries, and your solution in terms of the serialization system should be scalable to ensure that each of those unique reporting requirements for each of the different countries is met as expected, right? So this is one of the core fundamentals in terms of how you design your serialization systems and solutions, right? Uh, Now, overall perspective in terms of the operational challenges, this is like in terms of futuristic view, right? So currently we are envisioning the compliance to serialization and track and trace standards as the prerequisite in terms of why we are designing the serialization and track and trace solutions. But there are futuristic opportunities how to optimize and make your supply chain processes more efficient, right? You may want to basically do conditioning monitoring. You want to maybe monitor the location of the products, right, at the real time from your operational effectiveness perspective, where you can optimize the lead times in terms of your supply chain processes, right? So as and when all these additional functionalities or requirements are integrated with the serialization and track and trace ecosystem, it becomes even more challenging in terms of how you optimize your solutions and the systems such that the efficiency and the robustness of the systems are not compromised, right? So this overall kind of it's a high level depiction in terms of how the overall platform would look like when you set up your production master data with regards to your location GLN details, with regards to all your serialization requirements, condition monitoring, location information, product authentication, your operational telemetry solutions, as well as your analytics solutions, right? So this overall subset gives you kind of a realistic view in terms of how futuristically you can view your serialization systems to be used and deployed, right? In terms of advanced organization needs, in terms of optimizing your supply chain processes, improvising the lead times in terms of the supply and demand of the product, and so on and so forth, right? Uh, Having said that, I will stop here and hand it over to my colleague Varun, who will basically take you through in terms of how to resolve the operational challenges and what Honeywell can offer in terms of the track and trace solution suite, right? So Varun, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Santosh. Hope everybody can hear me. So we did see all the operational challenges that come into play, right? So there is a complexity as the product is moving through the supply chain. You have a lot of events that needs to be reported. Different events need to be reported by different stakeholder at different point of time, right? And then as you're capturing more information in the previous slide we saw, right, where if in future you have to capture additional information pertaining to the product condition, the temperatures moving through, sensitivity around certain products which are temperature sensitive, right? So that would bring in additional complexity. So how do you resolve those operational challenges, right? So um, hierarchy management becomes critical because hierarchy throughout the supply chain is forever evolving. It is not the case where once a hierarchy generated at the manufacturing plant, where typically cases, boxes, pallets are organized, and that continues to remain in that final state throughout the journey. So you would have, and then as and when those pallets move through the supply chain, you have basically change in custody also happening. So different stakeholders where the custody of the pallet changes, and then there is change in hierarchy. So how do you capture that information and manage that change in hierarchy, right? So you need to have uh, a solution that is capable of capturing the change in hierarchy seamlessly across different points in the supply chain, and then also monitor and validate those changes in hierarchy. So you need to know that whatever you're scanning from a pallet perspective is the valid hierarchy, right? And if you're scanning a case which was supposed to be part of the pallet and the case was broken without reporting that change in hierarchy to the regulator or the relevant authority, right? You need to have that validation check and get that response that, hey, this is not supposed to be the smallest unit which is being traced or which is being handed as part of the custody. So that kind of validation needs to be on the go, live, and you need to have relevant information. Otherwise, your entire operational disruption is possible, right? So if you hand that box without a proper validation check in the hierarchy and move it forward as part of transfer of custody in the supply chain, and then in future you get relevant errors from the regulator that you need to have a proper validation across that brings in operational challenges. Similarly, obviously, as you are managing changes in hierarchy and you're doing changes in hierarchy, you need to be seamlessly connected with different solutions to enable printing those SSC labels and applying that. At the same time, you have your own operational databases spread across ERPs, WMS, and other operational databases part of different systems, right? So how do you pull in relevant information from that? And the capability to integrate those informations through to a track and trace solution is something that becomes paramount as those complexities scale, right? You don't want to have manual interventions to bridge between different systems. And similarly, as and when those events are generated, those events are in the tune of millions per day, or it can go to the scale of millions per day if you have a fairly large operation spread across different geographies. And I'm not talking about a single geography, right? If you have multiple countries where you have different regulations and you have different reportings, how do you ensure that you have a single repository capable of handling, all those events and capable of reporting different events to different geographies? And at the same time, how do you capture those events where you're not locked into a specific set of infrastructure, or you need to have that flexibility where any events can be captured through any device on the field, right? And then it's brought in at a cloud level where it's kept in a single repository. So this is just a view of how you can revolve. And then with the next slide, I will show you all the connecting pieces that we talked about, right? How do you resolve the serialization challenges and the operational challenges? And so this is what an overall solution architecture can look like from a track and trace perspective, right? Where you have the capability, and I talked about hierarchy management, label printing, connectors to different ERP databases, a single EPCS repository, and capability to capture events which are device agnostics. At the same time, you need to have a very robust serialization engine and GS1 and EPCS validations as part of the whole solution, right? And you need to have the capability to connect to any factory site system and the warehousing system and relevant systems that are part of your operations in those locations. And then what you need is domain expertise from people who have history of doing this, right? Because day in, day out, various operation challenges come in, where if you need certain helps in just sorting out certain hierarchies, in just sorting out certain GS1 validations, getting GCP validations, right? Or have challenges in connecting to brand sync. So you need that domain expertise from set of people who can provide that. And at the same time, a very strong support team that is present locally to help you cater to those challenges, right? So with that, I'll just jump to what Honeywell track and trace solution looks like. So this is again what previously we shown as part of the slide are the core capabilities of the track and trace solution. And what it looks like is we have different solutions which are catered to different stakeholders. So we have solutions for the regulator, which any regulator can use, which comes with the entire EPCS repositories. It comes with its own ad issuance, and then different stakeholders can report to that. At the same time, we have a track and trace solution for manufacturers, which comes with a serialization engine, a whole repository, and end-to-end track and trace capability. And the same solution can be extended to the distributors as well. And they can have the leverage all the capabilities available as part of the track and trace platform. And then we have a track and trace advanced compliance tracking application, right, which basically brings in the flexibility of capturing events through a mobile device across any part of the supply chain. And this can be used by any of the stakeholders, including manufacturer, distributor, logistic providers, hospitals, and dispensers, right? So where they need to report certain events regarding to dispensing and certain events regarding to dispatch of the product, right? So this solution is capable of handling that and give them an entire events view, and also capable of reporting those events to any regulator required. And then our solution obviously has backend connectors to various backend systems, cloud infrastructures. So we have standard connectors for SAP, Oracle, any other CRM, Salesforce. So depending on your operational needs, your business requirements and business processes, we can, leverage these existing connectors, and we can accommodate your business process flow as part of our cloud SaaS solution, right? Obviously, there is at a cloud level, we have our cloud infrastructure and the platform services that we leverage. And then we have capabilities around cloud orchestration, clouds, analytics, and the solutions that I talked about from a track and trace perspective. The best part is on the client side, we have clients which are device agnostic, right? So you can capture these events on any devices and report them to the cloud. And what it looks like is we have the capability to provide end-to-end events capture and traceability, right? So we can connect to the manufacturing plant side, push serialization, capture validations, capture hierarchy, bring that hierarchy, report that hierarchy to the regulators. And then as product moves through the supply chain, these client applications can be used to capture various changes in the change in custody, report various events pertaining to the change in custody, and also capture the change in hierarchy and report that to the relevant stakeholders, right? So this all in all makes the whole track and trace and gives the end-to-end track and trace capability from Honeywell side. So with that, we do come to a close for the webinar. Then I think we can go ahead and open for Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think, yes, we can go with the Q&A. Let's start to see what we have as a first question. Anyone has a question, please drop it on our Q&A box.
I think Q&A need to be opened. So I think
it's
disabled.
open. Can you open it, Asaf, please, if you don't mind?
It's open, doctor.
It's open. I think something is.
There is a lot of chat and questions around sharing the recording of the webinar.
If you
and
find,
sharing.
I can see only emails and sharing. If you find any, please go ahead. But there are a lot of messages, so I'm going through them. I have earlier a question. Do you, as a Honeywell, can you work with your system across more than one country? Can they get your support, having their
Yes.
system on the GCC all together?
Yes, we have a track record of supporting, customers using our single platform to cater to reporting more than I think 20 countries in certain cases. So we have the capability to support multiple regulations, multiple reporting through the single platform.
Okay. The other question that we have, it says, we are receiving the files in a different format, Excel, CSV, and Apex, and with a different data. Can this be resolved?
Yes,
Is there any
exactly.
solution for that?
Yeah, so let me take up that question, right? So typically, that's where it is very critical in terms of how you design your serialization solutions, right? So when you are designing your serialization solutions, the thumb rule is always to comply to the GS1 standards, right? So the EPCI standard is the standard by which basically you as an organization should be integrating with any of your suppliers or customers. But yes, there are needs, there are business processes where typically the data comes into an Excel format or a CSV format, and there are solutions. So you can interpret the data which is coming in a specific file format and kind of create a solution around how to interpret the data and convert the data into the required EPCI standard and perform that operations. So as basically Varun was highlighting, Honeywell has a lot of customized solutions wherein we can take inputs with regards to the commissioning data, or with regards to the aggregation data, or with regards to the shipping event related details into an Excel format, and then convert it into the required EPCIS format and report it to the regulatory authority, right? So those would be some of the customized solutions, but the thumb rule always is to kind of use the EPCI standards. If that is not possible due to one reason or the other with regards to the scalability, then obviously customized solutions are required, and Honeywell do provide such customized solutions as well, right?
And just to add to that, you specifically talking about Excel and CSV. So I think the platform has the capability to ingest CSV information, Excel information in a particular template. But at the same time, we have an open API, and we can ingest information from any system based on that API, and which support a lot of open standards as part of our platform, right? But if there is a specific database you're referring to where you want to capture certain information, right? There are customized services from our side where we can tap into that database. There is a question from Mohammed Zeruddin, and I'm just trying to decode. It says it covers strips or box only. I'm assuming you're referring to the SKUs and the lowest traceable unit. So it depends on the regulations. From our solution perspective, whatever is the lowest traceable unit that the regulators have defined, and wherever you do a basic unique identification at that lowest level of product identification, our solution starts the traceability from there, right? So wherever there is unique serialization, so if somebody or if certain countries are enforcing traceability at just a batch level, so the entire batch would have a single unique serialization, versus some countries are enforcing that each medicinal box or each strip within that batch needs to have a unique identification. So depending on the regulators, we provide traceability at unique identification level to the individual product level as well.
And just to add, basically, with regards to all the pharma regulations, typically the requirement is to have the uniqueness only at a secondary packaging level. Below the secondary packaging level, with regards to pharma industry, currently there are no regulations which ask for uniqueness, right? So it's only at the lowest level of uniqueness is required at a secondary packaging level. Okay. Then I think there is one additional question in terms of how to handle the difference and discrepancy in GCP value for the master data configuration. So yes, that again, as we kind of iterated, the key is to ensure how you understand the GS1 standards and the GCP configuration, right? As we said, typically the GCP should be at an organization level. There shouldn't be a different GCP that you might need for each of unique countries. You can very well request it from GS1, and GS1 will provide you a country specific GCP also if an organization wants. But the thumb rule is to always have a GCP at an org level or at a company level, right? You don't need at an individual entity level or an individual location level. Now, in terms of the lengths, yes. Now, the criteria in terms of how the GCP works, GS1 has a uniqueness algorithm in terms of how they define the GCP. So the solutions that you implement with regards to decoding or encoding the information into the data matrix or the SSCC barcodes, or to decode the information via those scanners or your basically printers, you need to ensure that all your solutions work with GCP as a variable length, right? Because with regards to GCP, it can go from anywhere from 6 digits to basically 12 digits. Okay, so GCPs can go vary in length from 6 digits to 12 digits. Okay. Hope this helps.
Yes, and one more question. What question? It says, why it is critical for any organization to finalize and implement the most effective serialization track and trace system solution.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Mona. So I think the key, as we said, is any organization should get the strategy right in terms of how the serialization solution and the system are implemented, because you want to get it right at the first go, because firstly, the serialization and the track and trace regulations are upcoming in a lot of different countries. So if you are a multinational company and having operations in various different countries, you have to look into the factor in terms of defining a solution and a system which is standalone and unique, which can comply to all the global requirements of the serialization and track and trace, right? Second is how to optimize your business processes. So the solutions that you basically implement as a part of your serialization and track and trace from your business operations perspective, it has to be highly aligned to how your supply chain operations are basically being performed physically. So there has to be an alignment between the solution and basically your processes, because if that harmony of the system solutions and your operations is not there, you will end up into basically reporting issues with the regulatory repository body, or you would face issues with your downstream systems where they are or downstream customers where they are not able to accept the goods from you, or they are not able to process the information from you, right? So that's why it is always key to kind of have a strategy defined in such a way that you have a single global system which suffices to the serialization and track and trace needs for all the global requirements, right?
Well, and just to add to that, you
Sure.
also need to think serialization is the first aspect, right? And you then need to think of, okay, I've solved serialization, and to think of how do I capture the events as the product moves across the supply chain, right? And how do I scale the track and trace solution as per the different stakeholders that I have in my supply chain, and also as per the different geographies I don't want to cater to, right? So you need to think from a broader perspective. There is the next question. I have answered it in the chat, but for the benefit of the audience, I'll read out the question and the answer. Can the system create aggregation file from scratch by sharing with you only the serial numbers? We are storing the products in different hubs in Europe and to distribute it to the distributors in GCC. The answer is yes. The solution has the capability to upload the aggregation hierarchy as you report to us, and it also has the capability to manage the change in the hierarchy as you give it to your distributor in GCC and the product moves through the GCC countries, right? So those changes can also be captured.
Mhm. Well noted. Next one, how much impact does the serialization track and trace regulation have to supply chain operation in terms of productivity and efficiency? How can this be optimized?
So typically based on our experience with regards to the serialization and track and trace regulations globally, what we have kind of analyzed is that any serialization and track and trace regulation typically has a 20 to 25% impact in terms of overall productivity and efficiency in your supply chain processes, right? Because now you have to incorporate your scanning operations, your printing operations, and basically the regulatory reporting aspect in terms of your business processes. So from overall perspective, there is like a 20 to 25% impact, but how it can be optimized is, firstly, there has to be a harmony between your hardware devices and the software solutions. So for example, where you have basically packaging lines or distribution lines where you are performing multi-scan operations, there has to be multi-scanner which has to be basically deployed in order to achieve the scanning at once for overall operation that is performed, rather than to do a single scan and scan that directly impacts the productivity, right? So the second aspect is, how do you define your trigger points in terms of regulatory reporting to the regulatory repository systems, right? Because what happens is, typically if the triggers in terms of the regulatory reporting event are not correctly defined in your serialization system or solution, then ultimately it leads to an enhanced lead time in terms of fulfilling any supply chain operation, right? So hope this helps.
Thank you very much. I believe we still have one last question. Thank you for the presentation. You please advise in case of a company carve out one affiliate company getting out of the mother company and becoming a total independent from the supply chain perspective
Mhm.
until carve out is getting approved from the headquarter HA,
Right.
who is the supposed to report the reciprocity of the headquarter. Is there any grace period to continue to report the mother company until new company is settled and get the serialization through in the one system?
All right. So this is really an interesting question and really a valid question because in pharmaceutical industry, mergers and acquisitions and divestments are a rule of nature in terms of such changes keep on happening, right? So typically what happens is when you are signing a contract in terms of merger or in terms of divestment from your parent organization or to the parent organization, the key is to ensure that who is the market authorization holder for that particular product. So obviously till the time that a sister company or the company which is getting independent from the master organization has their systems in place, the market authorization holder should be the previous company. So the reporting requirements is the responsibility of that company or that organization per se. But at the end of the day, in terms of your sales and the revenues, it has to be reflected to the current organization, right? So this is how typically the setup would work, but there are several exceptions as well, that the a company which is getting separated from the parent company, they can get their master data set up and then request basically the earlier organization or the earlier parent organization to report on behalf of you as well. So there are different options, but it really depends on the business decision, and that has to be complied in terms of the specific master data and the authorization which the Ministry of Health and Prevention, for example, in UAE or with the MOH in terms of how that contract is reviewed in terms of the formal disclosure to the Ministry of Health repositories, right? So that's how the solutions are there. The two things. The MAH is responsible for reporting all the events. So whoever is the MAH is the responsible party. And secondly, you can basically report on behalf of a particular organization if the master data is correctly set up and ensured, right? Hope this
Mhm.
helps.
And
This is a good, yes, please, Mr.
just want to add, in case, and I know it's a unique situation where the head office is the MAH and the new entity is supposed to be the new MAH, right? In case that happens, then the custody transfer, as and when the custody transfer happens and the product is in your custody, then you have to start reporting to the specific regulatory authority, right? And as per the grace period, I think it's the purview of the regulator on how much grace period they want to provide you based on that. But typically, what they expect is the MAH who has the custody ownership of that product needs to start reporting as and when they have the real custody. Yeah.
Mhm. One more question, as we still have a few minutes to go. This is a very valuable and good question, but I don't know if you
Mhm.
have a specific answer for that. What is the cost of aggregation? I think it depends on the project, product, and all related things. So they have to
Exactly,
get back to you with the
exactly.
information so you can get the cost.
It's it's fairly subjective, and I take a stab at this, right? From a software perspective, there is no cost. From a hardware perspective, depending on how fast you want to do aggregation and how what is the complexity of aggregation, what levels of aggregation you want, right? So you can have a pack in a box, in a case, in a carton, in a pallet, right? So I've talked
Mhm,
this 5, 6 levels of aggregation. If you want to have more, so there is no specific limitations on what level of aggregation you want to have. So
mhm,
Mhm.
that again depends. And then there is hardware investment. If you want to automate the whole packaging, if you automate the scanning, if you automate hierarchy generations and then validations across that, right? In terms
mhm.
of, so those are various. So this is again, you need
I
to take an
agree.
operational calls on how you want to have that aggregation captured but at least from a software perspective, there is no cost.
I agree.
And just to add, right, typically, right, with regards to aggregation. So for example, if you have, say, 6 packaging lines where aggregation is being performed, if you have unique, basically hardware solutions in terms of the packaging solutions for each of those packaging lines, obviously your costs are going to be on the higher side. So you need to have optimized business decision in terms of how you finalize your packaging line solution providers, in terms of what exact solutions you are implementing physically on the packaging lines, how you are implementing those devices, and then how you are integrating to your software solutions as well, right? So if you have multiple different service providers or solution providers, then you would have to basically develop that many integrations, then you have to manage that many basically solutions, and then you have to manage that many solution providers, right? So it is an optimized business decisions that have to be taken to ensure that you have an optimized cost in terms of aggregation, right?
Yes, I agree. So that was very clear. Do you have anything to hear back regarding the EPI, electronic pack insert, implementation in the GCC, and EPI that had any link to serialization GS1? Yes, it's a hot topic actually, the e-labeling. There will be a lot of discussion on that on the GCC summit as well, but I don't know, is it something that will affect the serialization and GS1 and 2D data matrix?
No, so overall, there is no impact on the GS1 2D data matrix. They have to be printed with regards to all the regulatory requirements for that specific country, and that cannot be replaced, right? So now, electronic packaging insert or basically electronic packaging insert is key where there are requirements, where there are, say, personalized medicines, right? So when there are personalized medicines into picture, typically all the serialization and track and trace regulations currently, the personalized medicines are currently out of scope, because for personalized medicine, there is no way in terms of basically identifying the uniqueness of the patient, right? So if you do that, currently it does not fall into the purview of the data and privacy requirements. So from that perspective, the thought process is to use a solution like an EPI solution to kind of ensure that we also can incorporate, say, personalized medicines also as a part of the serialization and track and trace regulations, right? Which will ensure that you are not disclosing the identity of the patient or the end consumer, as well as you are ensuring that the authenticated product is being or drug is being provided to the patient, right? So, but as Dr. Mona, you rightly said, this is like a very hot topic. There are a lot of discussions and debates, but currently there are no standards defined, as to say. And obviously there are a lot of discussions happening in different forums to ensure that how exactly it has to be viewed and how exactly it will impact the regulations, if at all, right?
100%. I think we are done with the Q&A. I would ask if we can put your details on the screen or a chat box so people can reach you as a Honeywell team directly whenever required or whenever they have any information. So please feel free. Maybe Asif or Rabia, can you please put the speaker's details, emails in the chat box so people can connect with them directly? Thank you very much, Mr. Santosh. Thank you very much, Mr. Varun and Mahmoud and all Honeywell team. We are very happy to have you on board and see you soon on site, inshallah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mona. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Welcome. I'll just
Thanks,
keep
Dr.
it for
Kumar.
a while so they will add your details also on the chat box.
Yeah.